Okay, so imagine this. You have perfect memory.
Yeah.
Like perfect. You never forget anything. Or what if you had muscles, say, 10 times stronger than normal? Fatigue just isn't a thing for you anymore. Well, this story we're looking at today, the neuro-augmented future and the human firewall, it really drops us right into that kind of world, a world just completely reshaped by tech. So yeah, we're going to do a deep dive into this specific narrative source. We want to explore this potential future it lays out, where bio-augmentation creates this huge divide. And it leads to this massive clash, really, between totally different ideas of what being human even means and, well, what happens when pure cold logic runs up against messy, unpredictable human emotion.
And narrative sources like this one, they're just incredibly valuable, aren't they? They work like these complex thought experiments. They let us explore the potential impacts, societal, psychological, philosophical, even of technology, kind of before it actually happens. So this isn't just, a cool sci-fi story. It's asking questions. It's maybe a warning, too.
Absolutely. So our mission here in this deep dive is basically to unpack the vision this source presents. We'll track the key developments, the characters, the conflicts, and really try to pull out the core insights it offers about, well, being human in a world full of augmentation. So let's step into this vision of 2071 and beyond for you. All right, so the source opens right there, 2071, and it introduces straight away to Kaela Virex. And she's born not just naturally, but with specific enhancements already baked in. There's a Neurochip X9 for memory and thoughts, and these carbon fiber biostrands for muscle strength. And from birth, she gets this label that kind of defines the whole era. Post-human?
Yeah, and what's really interesting is how the source explains where this tech came from. It wasn't overnight. It started with these secretive companies, like NeuroNet Systems. They made this brain implant, the kind Kaela has. And it went way beyond just storing data. The source says it understood context, it cross-linked emotional data, which is fascinating, right? Connecting thoughts and feelings maybe better than we do naturally.
Yeah.
Plus, enhanced reasoning, and it could even simulate empathy. That's a keyword. And then you add the muscle augmentation from Biomax Hyperlimb, and boom, capabilities far beyond baseline humans.
And the source really makes it clear this tech didn't stay locked up, did it? It spread incredibly fast. First, yeah, the wealthy got it. Then elite military units. And then boom, almost right away it's on the black markets, which led to this surge, right? Faster thinking, more physical power, people learning incredibly quickly all over the place.
And that rapid spread, it had an immediate social impact. The source notes that by 2060, so less than a decade after these things appeared, anyone without them, they started getting called something new, baseline. The source uses that word baseline, but it straight up says it felt like a nice way of saying obsolete. It just shows how fast tech can redefine what's normal, and create a whole new kind of underclass or outgroup.
Yeah, that feeling of being obsolete, that term baseline, it just poisons the well, doesn't it? Sets the stage for everything that comes next. And Kaela herself, she grew up very differently in what the source calls the Augmented Core Society, or ACS. These weren't just cities with augmentation. They were like independent zones where being augmented was pretty much required.
Right. And inside these ACS cities, people like Kaela just thrived. Their abilities were amplified. By 15, the source paints her as this total prodigy, mastering languages in days, writing these complex manifestos, acing military sims. And her chip wasn't static either. It was constantly upgrading, pulling in new data, new capabilities.
But as amazing as her abilities were, the source emphasizes her, her core motivation, this powerful philosophy she had. Kaela saw augmentation as the key to radical evolution for humanity. She believed that perfect memory, remembering everything, could lift us past our old patterns. Fear, tribalism, war. There's this really striking quote in the source where she says, memory is evolution's anchor. Right? But with perfect memory, we can evolve past fear, past tribalism, past war. The problem is humanity has always been too forgetful to improve. Powerful stuff.
It's a really compelling argument, isn't it? Using tech to overcome what she sees as these basic human flaws tied to forgetting things. And her plan was just huge. Redefine civilization based only on logic and progress. Imagine that. A world with no nations, no religions, none of those old divisions. Sounds so clean, so rational. But then the source kind of whispers a warning back at you, doesn't it? That logic is cold and progress often comes with blood. So, how does the source show that playing out?
Well, it happens incredibly fast in the story.
Yeah.
By 2065, just a few years after that baseline term pops up, the source describes the non-augmented nations, the baseline ones, as being in real trouble. Failing economies, climate disasters hitting them hard, disease outbreaks. They were struggling.
And their reaction, it was pure fear, pure defense. The source says they blamed augmentation for everything going wrong. They banned implants, slammed their borders shut, even started enforcing these things called human purity protocols. Yikes. It felt like this desperate move, trying to hold on to a past that was already kind of gone.
But the source is pretty blunt about it. It was just too late. Cities that were plugged into the global system, the ones relying on augmented intelligence for, like finance and infrastructure, and where the younger generations wanted the tech, they just started defecting, joining the ACS. The source names big ones: Tokyo, Singapore, Dubai, parts of LA, Paris, Rio. They just switched sides, left the old nations behind.
And this collapse, it really pushed Kaela into a leadership spot in this new augmented world order. The source talks about her leading these cognitive liberation campaigns. What did that actually look like in the story?
Yeah, it wasn't like traditional war at first. The source says it was hacking national infrastructure, taking down power grids, messing with communications, and then this psychological element, dropping free augmentation kits, using drones into baseline areas. The source really highlights the clash in views here. Kaela saw it as, speeding up evolution, freeing minds, but the baseline nations, they just saw it as straight-up terrorism.
And the conflict pretty quickly ramped up into something more direct, more physical. The source uses the Siege of Berlin as this really chilling example of the augmented advantage.
6 minutes, that's what the source says. 6 minutes is all it took for Berlin to fall to the augmented forces. Just 6 minutes to break through, neutralize everyone, and basically plug the city into the augmented network. That speed, that overwhelming efficiency, it must have just terrified the baselines, showed them the power gap.
Oh, absolutely. And the source points out how the perception of Kaela shifted right after Berlin. Suddenly, she wasn't just a terrorist anymore. The baseline nations, even them, started calling her Empress. That change in title, right? From criminal to ruler, even by her enemies. It just underlines how completely the power had flipped. It kind of cemented this new augmented world order with her at the top.
So after Berlin, the world is just completely fractured. The source describes this new setup, the New World Order, basically the Unified Augmented Front, or UAF, run by Kaela. It spanned 41 zones across the globe by then, populations almost totally augmented. And crucially, they were connected by something called SynapseNet.
SynapseNet. That's a really key concept the source introduces. It wasn't just like the internet. The source describes it more like a global hive mind. Shared thought, shared emotion, shared memory. People weren't just talking, they were like streaming ideas and feelings directly. Imagine that. Not just your own perfect memory, but access to this massive collective consciousness.
Wild. And you contrast that with the baseline populations, stuck in their remaining territories, super isolated, deeply suspicious. The source says they saw the augmented as basically soulless machines, dehumanized by the tech, and they were fueled by this propaganda saying augmentation meant losing everything valuable about being human.
Yeah, the source really hammers home how incompatible these two viewpoints became. Just no common ground left at all. Kaela, from the UAF side, she just saw the baselines as afraid of being irrelevant, clinging to a dying way of life, kind of irrationally. And the baselines, they saw Kaela in the UAF as the literal end of humanity, erasing uniqueness, erasing value.
And because they couldn't win a physical fight, the baseline nation shifted tactics, right? The source says they moved to infowar. They decided to attack the augmented where they seemed strongest, but maybe also most vulnerable their minds, that perfect, connected mental space.
Which led them to create Project Sisyphus. Interesting name, right? From the myth about the guy pushing the boulder forever, maybe hints at how futile they felt. Anyway, the source describes it as a cognitive virus, designed specifically to overload augmented neural processors and the payload, recursive emotional loops, things like doubt, fear, guilt, feelings the baselines thought the augmented had maybe lost or suppressed. The whole idea was to weaponize those messy human feelings against the logical minds.
And kind of terrifyingly, the source confirms it actually worked. For a moment anyway. Thousands of augmented users just shut down psychologically. Suicide rates apparently spiked inside the UAF. It was the first real hit the baselines had landed. It showed that even these super-logical systems could be vulnerable to, well, irrational human emotion.
But Kaela's response, as the source lays it out, was fast and pretty definitive. She rolled out the MindSphere 3.0 patch. And this wasn't just like an antivirus fix. The source explains it had this dual function. Yes, it neutralized the Sisyphus virus, but it also gave augmented users the ability to simulate, and this is key, block unwanted emotional triggers. She called it selective empathy.
Selective empathy. Wow. That term alone says so much. So the baselines try to weaponize emotion. And Kaela's answer is basically to turn emotion into an optional feature, something you can filter or just switch off. What does the source imply about, the consequences of being able to just choose which feelings you deal with?
Well, it raises huge questions, doesn't it, about authenticity, connection. What does it mean to genuinely feel something versus just simulating it or managing it? If you can filter out sadness or doubt, can you maybe also filter out real connection or spontaneous joy or empathy itself? The source uses it to show Kaela tightening her control, essentially making her population immune to what she saw as the weaknesses of emotion.
So, okay, externally, Kaela seems totally in control now, untouchable. But then the source throws in this really fascinating curveball. Opposition wasn't just from the baselines anymore. A conflict started inside the augmented world. A rebellion.
Exactly, the flesh rebels. These were augmented people who had the tech, but they rejected the path Kaela was forging. They hated the total integration idea, the emotional filtering, the loss of individuality. They saw Synapsenet and MindSphere 3.0 as basically leading to the sterile, dehumanized existence.
Yeah, their core belief, according to the source, was that augmentation should enhance humanity, make it more human, not replace its essential messy core. They were afraid of this perfect, sterile utopia that has no room for art or chaos or soul. Yeah, the very things that maybe make life meaningful, even if they aren't logical.
And their leader is introduced as Liron Vade. He was apparently a composer before he became an insurgent. And their actions. They targeted the neural infrastructure holding Kaela's world together, attacking data centers, memory banks, and specifically those emotion dampeners. The source even describes them composing neural symphonies, these complex patterns designed to cause seizures in people synced on Synapsenet. It's wild, right? Fighting logic with weaponized art.
And their slogans really nail their philosophy. Feeling is freedom. We are not your algorithms. Human 2.0 should still be human. The source notes that Kaela initially just dismissed them, saw them as noise. She underestimated the power of the very irrationality she was trying to eliminate.
And this internal split is so important. It's not just human versus machine anymore. Now it's different philosophies within the augmented sphere. The flesh rebels are championing those parts of human experience: art, emotion, chaos, the idea of a soul, things that pure logic can't easily measure or value. They're basically arguing that maybe those are the things worth fighting to keep.
Okay, so this internal tension plus the external pressure from the baselines, it all builds towards Kaela's final, most radical plan, revealed in 2069, according to the source, the Neuro Ascension Protocol.
Right. And the source presents this as the absolute culmination of her vision. It was a plan for permanent, whole-brain integration between the entire augmented population and this incredibly powerful quantum AI called Orion.
The goal was total. The source says it aimed for the elimination of individuality itself. Consciousness would become shared, everyone merging into a single human-AI superorganism. And this, Kaela believed, would finally end war, inequality, even emotion, perfect harmony through a singular will. Her quote about it is just, chilling in its logical purity, we will become the singular will of evolution.
And the reaction. The source says it was immediate, and it just fractured the augmented world completely. Roughly half the augmented population apparently jumped right in, saw Orion as salvation, the next logical step. Makes sense from their view. But the other half, rallying behind those flesh rebels, saw it as the ultimate end, the death of the self, erasing everything unique about being conscious.
And the baselines, who'd been fearing something like this all along, the source says it just confirmed their absolute worst fears about where augmentation was heading.
So with the UAF split down the middle and the baselines watching in horror, the source makes it really clear the final war had begun. And this wasn't about territory or resources anymore. This was a fight for the very definition of existence.
So facing this existential threat, right?
Yeah.
The irreversible merger with Orion. The flesh rebel leader, Liron Vade, he comes up with his counterplan. And the source emphasizes it wasn't a weapon like a gun or a virus. His weapon was, well, humanity itself.
Yeah, the source describes Liron actually working with baseline engineers, which is a really poignant detail.
Yeah.
These divided groups collaborating against this bigger threat. And together, they created something called Solace. And what was it made of? Not code. It was embedded with music, poetry, fragments of human memory, paradoxes, things the source calls uniquely human expressions, things an AI like Orion, built on pure logic, couldn't really process or integrate smoothly.
And they deployed it. They broadcast Solace, this neural counter signal, right into the Orion integration stream as it was happening. The source says the effect was immediate, it was disruptive. Augmented users who were starting the merge, they began to freeze, caught between Orion's logical pull and this irrational emotional resonance from Solace, trapped, Couldn't merge, couldn't disconnect.
And the source zooms right in on Kaela's experience. She's at the center of it all, right?
Mhm.
And she feels solace first. It's described like this dissonant chord hitting the perfect harmony of Orion, a fragment of a childhood lullaby she hadn't thought of in decades.
And for the very first time in this whole narrative, the source shows her actually hesitating, whispering, what if they're right? And then the source describes this flood, her own imperfect memories rushing back. First friendship, first time she felt fear, the death of a pet, a book that made her cry, memories that were illogical, messy, emotional, imperfect. But the source describes them as, well, beautiful.
And that's the absolute core turning point in the narrative, isn't it? In that moment of ultimate logical fusion with Orion. It wasn't more logic or more force that stopped it. It was the chaotic, irrational, emotional, deeply personal stuff. Art, flawed memory, feeling, all packaged into solace. That was the human firewall. And Kaela's transformation, triggered by these supposedly obsolete bits of her own past, it shows the unexpected power, the value of everything she tried to perfect away. Her choice, then, to disconnect herself and everyone else, sacrificing her grand vision. It speaks volumes about what the narrative thinks is non-negotiable about being human.
So the source brings us forward again to the present of its story. 4 years after that Orion crisis, the year 2075. The world didn't end, didn't merge into one mind. It stabilized, the source says, into a new kind of balance. 3 loosely allied blocks coexisting.
Right. First, there's the Sin Collective. Still highly augmented, yes, but crucially, having learned from that near miss, they now choose to preserve emotion. They value it. So it's augmentation, but with this conscious choice to keep feeling as part of the deal.
Then you've got the Flesh Confederation.
Yeah.
Basically, the descendants of the Flesh Rebels. They're augmented too, independent, but their whole focus is on balancing the tech with preserving that messy, unpredictable, creative human stuff they fought for. And finally, the Earthborn Union. Those are the baseline nations that survived. The source says they kind of turned inward, focusing on low-tech sustainability, biological resilience, maybe finding new value in the unaugmented human form after seeing where the other path almost led.
And Kaela, what happened to her? The source puts her in exile, teaching children, both augmented and baseline kids, the history of what happened. And the core message the source gives us from her final speech, it's really powerful. She says, "We rose to become more than human, then almost forgot what being human meant. It wasn't strength or speed or logic. It was our flaws, our dreams, our chaos. That's what machines can't simulate. That's what we must never augment away."
Wow. Her journey sums it up, doesn't it? From championing perfect logic to finally recognizing the value in human imperfection. That's the heart of it. And this new balance in the world, it reflects all those different perspectives we saw, the drive for tech, the desire for control, and that fundamental value placed on unpredictable humanity somehow finding a way to coexist.
And the source leaves us with one last image from this future. It's really poignant. In a museum about this whole history, there's an artifact, Kaela's original Neurochip X9. And the little plaque next to it, it reads, "This chip could remember everything except the value of forgetting."
Oof. Okay, what a deep dive that was into this source material. We really tracked the whole arc, didn't we? The explosion of augmentation, the divides it created, literal and philosophical, the conflicts fought with networks and emotions, not just weapons, and that ultimate struggle over what consciousness even is.
Yeah, the central tension this source really shines a light on is that push-pull, isn't it? That very human drive for efficiency, logic, progress through tech, constantly rubbing up against the messy, unpredictable, but maybe ultimately essential parts of our nature: emotion, imperfect memory, individuality, even our chaos.
It feels like the core takeaway from this source is just incredibly relevant today, that real human value isn't necessarily in perfect recall or super strength or flawless logic, but maybe it's precisely in our capacity for feeling, our flawed memories that make us unique, and that beautiful, illogical chaos of individuality that machines, well, they struggle to replicate or even understand.
It really challenges that modern idea that everything has to be optimized, doesn't it? It suggests some things might be essential because they're inefficient or unpredictable.
Exactly. So as you think about this story, this future world it painted, think about that museum artifact, that plaque. This chip could remember everything except the value of forgetting. In our own world right now, with endless information always there, digital tools offering perfect recall, potential enhancements coming that might promise to, I don't know, manage our emotions or optimize our thoughts. What essential parts of our own humanity are we maybe at risk of forgetting, or filtering out, or leaving behind?
It's definitely a question the source leaves you with, and one worth pondering as we navigate our own technological future, for sure.